subject this afternoon is cannabis, a subject which is of interest to large numbers of people, though it's rarely discussed, and in fact seems to have attained the status of somewhat of a taboo in polite society. My interest in it is intense and lifelong, I must say. I remember when I first encountered it, within a few minutes of my first exposure to it, I realized that I was going to be able to self-medicate myself to normalcy. I was, as an adolescent, what's called a nervous child, and sort of had a personal style that was very hard driving and, I'm told, fairly abrasive. And it really came with the force of a revelation that the mere smoking of a small amount of vegetable material could completely invert the structures of my personality and socialize me, as it were, into a reasonably functioning member of the community in which I found myself. I first encountered cannabis in Berkeley in this Easter vacation of 1965, and it took a couple or three exposures to it before I really sorted out what it was doing for me, and I brought to it all the programming that my middle-class straight parents had given me concerning the subject, that this was the weed of death, that the road to hell was paved with this particular substance. But I also had been exposed to some of the literature of the Beat generation, the writings of Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and some of those people. And within just a few months, I had integrated it into my lifestyle as really the central practice of my life. And it has remained so up until just 2 or 3 months ago, when, under the pressure of my apparently dissolving marriage, I stopped smoking in order to see, really, what sort of effect it would have. I was in the sort of absurd position of being in psychotherapy with a woman who I respected very much and who seemed to be a very skilled psychotherapist, except that she had no sophistication whatsoever about cannabis.
Don't suit you. That's a drag. School's out for summer. I can't hear you. School's out forever. School's been blown to pieces.
Ladies and gentlemen.
You're having a nightmare. What if it's true?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Alan, it's a possibility, isn't it?
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Secrets.
In a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers
Constant, extreme danger.
which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger.
Extreme danger.
Need for increased security.
This is Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park.
Will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
You're crazy.
And no officious, high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes.
Isn't the Pentagon suspicious that all the buildings would blow up?
Or to withhold from the press and the public
I think you're just looking at things for the first time.
the facts they deserve to know.
You've had your whole f***ing life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
The facts they deserve to know. They deserve to know. Deserve to know. Deserve to know. Facts they deserve to know.
Those who have achieved an elevated existence, raise your fists.
Hey, welcome to Conspiracy Queries. Welcome to Green Crush. What's happening today? A lot of technical problems. Me no likey. But I'm getting used to it, because that's what always happens. Welcome to the show. This is 116 and 44. 116 and 44, meaning 116 of Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, and number 44 of Green Crush with Alan Park. I should just put my name into both of those titles like I already did, huh? That's what we should do. We have a fantastic show today because we always talk to interesting people. And despite the fact that I'm having some technical troubles here, I don't know what's going on, but I've either gone deaf or we've lost a lot of gain on the board. Anyway, you don't care about that stuff. Welcome to a beautiful sunny day in Toronto anyway. And I'm just talking about the weather, nothing else. We do have a great guest today. His name is Ernie Cefalu, and if you've ever participated in the act of consuming marijuana, you've got something in common with Ernie. Ernie is the president of King Klone. He's also the creative director, and I could just leave it at that. That's already good enough. That's a great guest right there because he is the president of King Klone, spelled with K's. And Ernie is the creative director. He is a businessman bringing this company forward, and we're going to hear all kinds of great things about why that company is so great and wonderful and great to have on the planet and with us. But that's not just the only reason that Ernie is on the show. That's the back end of the story. We'll get to that later. Ernie is also a 3-time nominated Hall of Famer. And when I say that, I mean about the Grammys. He's a creative director with album art credits. Here we go. We're getting into the art now. And you'll be able to understand and listen to Ernie tell us all about how cannabis helped him or what it was doing to him or with him in his life when he was designing album covers. Remember those? Those were good for weed too, especially the gatefold versions that would open right on up, and you could get all the seeds to roll to the middle back in the 70s. And then we throw them in the garbage like a bunch of idiots. Hopefully all the seeds I threw out were contaminated. You don't find them anymore unless you're purchasing high-quality seeds, but back in the day, we couldn't wait to get rid of those. Anyway, he designed the Aerosmith album. We'll find out which one, or ones. It gets a little bit complicated because he also did Black Sabbath, The Doors, Alice Cooper, hence School's Out being played at the beginning of the show. There's always a reason why the classic rock cut at the beginning of the show after Terence McKenna ties in, you know. If you listen and pay attention, it really does tie in. And so this time is no different. We have Alice Cooper singing School's Out, and it's about the right time for that too. So that was the reason why Alice gets the pinch. The Bee Gees were also heralded by this gentleman, as well as Cheech and Chong, the Guess Who. And if you've ever seen a group called the Rolling Stones, or you're a fan of them, you might have noticed this Lips logo that's been with them since, 1971, 2, 3. Ernie will know because he designed it. He'll tell us all about it. It's ubiquitous, that particular logo. And but now he is, I'm sure he is still an artist. I mean, you can't believe all the great stuff he's done, but he spends most of his time now as the president of King Klone Brand. And he works with Cannabis. I almost said that. Cannabis geneticists to bring strains like Granddaddy Perp. Now, if I could get Granddaddy Perp on as an interviewee instead of Ernie, I might bump him. But Ernie will tell us all about that shortly. But first, let's get to some business. I got to do some cleaning up. I'm sorry last week I didn't mention something that I should have, and I'm still very excited about it. It just, I got a little carried away last week. That can happen. And so here's what I want to say is we have some great news, an announcement, so to speak. Here's the announcement. I don't know if you're you must be listening to this somehow or other using the internet. So check this out. We have a new website. And it is brought to you by the great folks at cannabisdaily.co. So if you're looking for our website, of course, if you were looking for us before, you can always find us at Green Crush Pod. There we are on Facebook, Instagram, InstaFace, Twitter Face, all of those things. And now we are also to be found at greencrushpodcast.com. All of it put together came to life last week, a few days ago, I guess, before the weekend. And it's great to be able to say, well, what's your website? greencrushpodcast.com. Easy to spell, lowercase, one word. There we all are with our shows. That's where we're going to be if and when YouTube drops the hammer. And when I say that, if you're new to listening to topics such as this, apparently YouTube doesn't want cannabis information out there, and yet there we are every week pumping it out there in larger shows and smaller segments, chopped up for you to understand and play it at Thanksgiving dinners to your cranky old uncle who's a Christian and doesn't believe this kind of thing should be happening. Of course, he's the wrong kind of Christian then, isn't he? Any good Christian will know this stuff's enshrined in the Bible, and you don't have to be a believer to understand that there's no argument that the Bible was written a long time ago, no matter who you want to think wrote it. And the information in there about cannabis is just about all I need if I ever go to court. So thanks again for cannabisdaily.co, who I will now feature by reading some stories on their website. I also want to mention another group of people helping us out. Truth Seeker app. Truth Seeker app is featuring our show on their app. Now, I don't have an app, but they do. Truth Seeker app. Great shows on there. And maybe you don't want a lot of different, apps cluttering up your cyberspace space. So just get the Truth Seeker app, and my show is on there. My other show is on there. It's the same show sometimes. You can go back into the history from before the join, before episode 23 of Green Crush, and go all the way back to the beginning of Conspiracy Queries. It's all on Truth Seeker app. Folks in England helping us out, which is kind of interesting. We'll get to England later. Truth Seeker app is helping us out, but other folks in England are not helping us out, and not particularly my own self, but cannabis users in general. But let's get to cannabisdaily.co. What's on their website today? They've got a story on how the U.S. states can heave a sigh of relief with the introduction of a new bill giving them the freedom to legalize cannabis without federal intervention. This is the let's remove Jeff Sessions' testicles law. If he had any. He doesn't anymore. He's been a real fuss about all of this. And now it looks like the U.S. states that can heave a sigh of relief. Not if you're against cannabis, though. But it says here that Republican Senator Cory Gardner and Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who I believe is going to be running on a ticket with Bernie Sanders the next time they have a presidential selection, introduced a new bipartisan bill that would allow the U.S. states the right and freedom to legalize cannabis without the federal government interfering. My goodness, could we use something like that in Ontario? We've just flushed the toilet bowl of one of the gatekeepers of cannabis, Kathleen Wynne, who I have taken apart on the show. It's my hope and my dream that some of my criticism of her face-to-face, that she lied about being able to have a continuing conversation about, she fucking lied about it. Consistently and completely ignored me thereafter. Anyway, she's been disposed of. And when I say that, I mean she's going to get a big fat pension for the rest of her days in return for fucking up the cannabis legislation in Ontario and all kinds of other things, running up a budget into crazy town. There's a big long list that doesn't really fit into the purview of the show, but I won't miss her. And her dreaded enemy who's taken over, well, it's her fault that he's here, folks. She just didn't get it all wrong for her pretty much her whole term. We wouldn't have been so sick and tired of her and despising of her ways and means to bring force. I'll stick with that. Bring force to this oppressive legislation that these clown bags in Ontario have brought forward. Now, we'll see how the new cats get along with adjusting it, but my goodness, we don't miss any of those freaks. Liberal, my ass. Progressive, my ass. Suppressive is more like it. Suppressive of democracy, suppressive of economic powerhouse that can and will provide the funding that she kept going to town hall meetings. And how are we going to drum up business? How are we going to get this done? Shut the fuck up and get out of the way, maybe. And she has done that now. Like, again, I say, but for this pension. I think there should be a rule. Once the politicians are over, are they going to draw a pension? I think that really depends on looking forward or looking back at your track record and saying, well, did you really help here? Did you really get anything done for this province, for this country? And I guess the argument could be made you'd have to be pretty lenient with that. Or a lot of the parasitical tit suckers who get into politics for the reason of getting the big fat payout on the way out wouldn't do it. But really, when you've ground your party to a nub and reduce them to the point where you now have to beg the guy who hates you and has always said you've been a problem with asking him for official party status, otherwise relegating you to the backburgs forever, or for a long time anyway. That's her pathetic leadership style. Took him to the dirt, eliminated almost everyone in the party. Now she's begging the guy who walloped her for mercy to be able to retain official party status. This is the thinking of a sober mind, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, she doesn't take cannabis at all, thinks it's not a best idea. Anyway, that's where she came up with these thoughts from her unaffected mind. Back to the States. This Republican Senator, Cory Gardner, and the Democratic Senator, Elizabeth Warren, introduced the legislation as a response to the Trump administration's strict stance against cannabis. Once again, that's Jeff Sessions. Not enough oxygen in the old womb there, you got to figure. The States Act would amend the Controlled Substances Act to include a framework saying that it no longer applies to states or non-state territories like Washington, D.C., overseas territories like Puerto Rico and Guam, and tribal lands that have laws relating to the production, possession, distribution, administration, and delivery of cannabis. Those two senators in both parties represent states that have legalized recreational marijuana. Gardner from Colorado, Warren from Massachusetts. Warren says it's time to reform America's outdated cannabis policies. That sounds like a running for president kind of thing right there, just that sentence. She says states like Massachusetts have put in a lot of work into implementing cannabis regulations, so they have the right to enforce their own cannabis policies. The federal government needs to stop outlawing cannabis. Listen up here in Canada, Bill Blair. The structures are coming down. You guys went on a shopping trip to find out what's good and what's not good about cannabis. Man, you got it all wrong. It's like sending your kid to the store with, a list of things to get. He comes back with five tubs of margarine and a box of crackers and says, here's dinner. Picked out the wrong laws, Billy boy. Picked out the wrong ways and means, son. Punch-drunk face on that guy makes me sick looking at him. He's really a kind of an unpleasant fellow, considering he's got anything to do with the health ministry of this country. It's an embarrassment. I get to say that on my show because it's probably one of the only places I can do it. I was invited to speak at a weed booth in a weed show a couple of weeks ago, and they turned down the microphone while I was in the middle of this very salient point. You can't let these idiots cloud up a series of terrible laws that the rest of us normal, regular, decent, rights-loving folks have to spend another 5 to 7 decades worth of time to unravel. Get the fuck out of here, Bill. So we get a little bit closer to legalization here in Canada. But before I get to the mistakes all of the senators made, let's go to England. I'm going to go to England soon. I don't know when, but I'm going to go soon. We have to understand that there's a lot of cool people out there in the world trying to do the right thing, and one of them lives in England, and I'd love to meet her. Double load today. Yeah, Billy Caldwell. Billy Caldwell has a mother, and let's tell you this story. If you don't know this story, it's going to sound made up. It's going to sound ridiculous, but it's 100% true. This is in Belfast Live. Of course, they're paying attention in Ireland as well because they pretty much have to. We've heard what in Ireland, the southern portion of Ireland, we've got a mother over there, Vera Toomey, bringing forth this medicine for her daughter, Ava. And now let's spend some time talking about Charlotte Caldwell. She has a son named Billy, and they were at Heathrow Airport after coming back from Canada. Let me tell you the story. Billy Caldwell's mother will return to Canada, so she has vowed anyway, to get more cannabis oil, which she has used to treat her son's severe epilepsy. So she already knows it works. It's already been, evident that his spasms have greatly diminished. And he has a better time using this medicine that's a plant that grows in the ground. So she came here to Toronto to get some. Now, it's not legal here, but you can get it. Trust me. And she got some of that stuff, and she decided to take it back home to England for her 12-year-old son, getting a 6-month supply, because this little boy gets about 100 seizures a day. However, when she got back to Heathrow, they took it away from her. Ms. Caldwell from Castledurg in County Tyrone accused Home Office Minister Nick Hurd of having, quote, likely signed my son's death warrant before heading to a London meeting with him. It's Billy's anti-epileptic medication that Nick Hurd has taken away. It's not some sort of joint full of recreational cannabis, she told a press conference. I will just go back to Canada and get more, and I will bring it back again because my son has a right to have his anti-epileptic medication in his country, in his own home. And if you're going to fund bullshit pharma, which doesn't work properly, other than the carrying agents and everything else in there, to hurt the young lad, multiplied by everybody that needs this medicine, you are a vampire. And we need to get guillotines built again. Now, they don't use any fuel. Maybe Tesla can design a fantastic guillotine powered by magnetism. Who knows? But I am so done with the bullshit and the headspace of these punks that pretend to rule while they keep away medicine from kids that are having 100 seizures a day. Now I'd like Nick Hurd to have 10 seizures a day. I'd like to have Bill Blair have 100 seizures a day. I'd like to have anybody that's getting in the way of this experience 100 seizures a day. And let's see how tough they are. Let's see how many seizures they can sustain before they're begging for some pharmaceutical that doesn't really help them out. No, they'll be begging for the oil. If we have any witches listening of a good heart, if we have any people that bend physics, consider instilling one of the many diseases that take place in innocent people into some of the folks that are preventing us from accessing this medicine. I would love to see someone such as a gatekeeper of this fine plant writhing in agony, being told, I'm so sorry, Tubby. You can't have any. Just sweat it out. You'll be okay. You don't want to break the law, do you? We're done with this. We were supposed to have Paul Flynn on today. He's a politician from England in Jeremy Corbyn's left party, the Labour Party. And regardless of what you think of left or right, there's no arguing this man is a politician standing up telling people they should use cannabis and that the laws against it are illegal. And I guess that's how you get a hands across the aisle with a Republican on one hand and an Elizabeth Warren Democrat on the other going, look, man, this stuff is good and it works, and you got to stop telling people who have a right to use it that they don't, because we are going to bring down the force of retribution on the heads of those that stand in the way. It's never going to end. We're never going to stop doing it. Not with threats, not with arrests. It's never going to stop. It's unsustainable. So why don't you turn that energy to building the country instead of tearing apart the people that live in it? Back to Billy Caldwell's mother. She says, let me tell you something now. This is a quote. She says that. Let me tell you something now. We will not stop. We are not going to stop. We are not going to give up. We have love, hope, faith for our kids, and we are going to continue. She said Billy was due his next dose at 3:30 that day and warned of the dangers of missing his first treatment in 19 months. The reason they don't do it is that it can really cause bad side effects. They wean them down slowly. So what Nick Hurd has just done is most likely signing my son's death warrant. She said meeting Hurd at the Home Office Monday afternoon to plead him parent to parent to get the oil back. Ms. Caldwell, 50, said she was absolutely devastated to have the supply taken away after declaring it to border officials. and claimed one of the border officials welled up with tears while doing it. They are parents themselves, and they were very conflicted about removing the medication from me. In fact, one of them had tears in their eyes when he was doing it. They don't want to do it, but they're mindless, servile cogs in a machine, so they do it anyway. That's why most people do things. Well, the government said we should do it, so I guess we... Billy started the treatment in 2016 in the U.S., where medical marijuana is legal. He became the first person in the UK to receive a prescription after his local GP, that's a general practitioner doctor, Brendan O'Hare, I'll bet he's Irish, began writing scripts. The doctor was summoned to a meeting with Home Office officials recently and told to desist. Desist with that allergy disease drug you have there. Just because it's eliminating 100 seizures a day doesn't give you the right to... Yes, it does. These are the facts. While the same thing is going on in Canada, we're going to get to Ernie really soon, but the Canadian Senate, these doddering old fools. I don't like to be ageist, but if you're old and you're doddering, that's what you are. Canadian Senate amends Cannabis Act. They put 40 changes on this ridiculous act that Justin Trudeau, through this cop at the top, has forwarded for us. 40 changes. If you're looking for amendments in our favor of the user, forget it. It's nearing the final reading in the Senate. The last-minute fussing over the contents is heating up. So last week, the Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology, did they study any before they made their recommendations? Recommended amendments to the Cannabis Act that would empower provinces to ban home cultivation. Holy fucking shit. Try to enforce that, you idiots, and establish mandatory THC limits on all cannabis products sold in the country. Oh my God. So stupid, so backwards, so ridiculous, and so about to be defeated by everybody with a conscience and intelligence. The Standing Committee also rejected a number of amendments, including a proposed nationwide ban on home cultivation. So thank God we swept through that. So apparently in the country, there was going to be a nationwide ban on home cultivation. But now it's down to certain provinces. Okay, so you don't want this stuff getting out anywhere unless you've got your fingers into the kitty of the companies you're investing into. Just like Bill Blair, who does not have the testicular fortitude to come out and tell the truth on exactly which companies that are major licensed producers is he deeply invested in and expecting to get a fat return from. The Toronto Star says Senate approves marijuana legalization bill with dozens of amendments, 40 of them. And recreational cannabis. Bill C-45 passed in the upper house late Thursday by a vote of 56-30 with one abstention over the objections of conservative senators who remained resolutely opposed. Those guys remain resolutely opposed to opening their anus while sitting on the toilet in case it's dirty and indecent. That's how uptight they are. Anal retentive to the max. Don't flush! The bill must now go back to the House of Commons, where the government will decide whether to approve, reject, or modify the changes before returning it to the Senate for another vote. Most of the Senate's amendments are minor, but about a dozen are significant, including one to allow provinces to prohibit home cultivation of cannabis if they choose, rather than accept the 4 marijuana plants per dwelling, which is already pathetically too low. So Quebec and Manitoba have already gotten on that wagon to prohibit homegrown weed. But the amendment would erase the possibility of legal challenges to their constitutional authority to do so, once again bringing up the entire notion of needing to have guillotines back in here. We need a Bastille Day, folks. You need to talk about this, and you need to understand this. Because even if you're not a consumer thereof at this point, maybe you don't do recreational cannabis, keep that up and one day you'll need the medicinal variety. That's almost a guarantee. Where can you talk about things like that other than this show, Green Crush with Alan Park? Well, I'll tell you. How about the 420 Lounge at 1530 Queen Street West? It's open from 12 till midnight. It's a cannabis lounge. Oh, that's illegal. Go fuck yourself. Too bad. It's a cannabis lounge, and it's an accessory shop, and it's in the heart of Parkdale in Toronto. Soon going to be offering live shows. Well, some places have done that in the city, tying in a weed theme with their music or what have you. Participated in stuff like that before myself, but they don't always get it right. And so now I no longer participate in that one. But anyway, these guys might be doing something. Stay tuned. Stay tuned and listen to this show and check out the 420 Lounge at 1530 Queen Street West in Toronto's Parkdale. Visit Kassam and friends today. All right. Well, that brings us to the guest. Now, what we've done is we've gone ahead and contacted Ernie was going to be a guest a little bit down the road, but as soon as Paul Flynn from England wasn't able to come on because he's got some Brexit problems, we decided to jump on Ernie, and hopefully he's right there. Let's give him a ding. Ernie Cefalu, ladies and gentlemen. Dig up your album collection and take a listen to this guy. I'm sure you have some of his finer pieces available, such as anything from the Rolling Stones that has that lip on it. Here we go. We are trying to get a hold of Ernie. This is live out.
Hello?
There he is. There he is.
Hey.
Now,
Hey.
what were you just
What's
doing?
up?
What did I just interrupt, Ernie?
Oh, no, nothing. I was on the phone with these people that I'm doing some stuff with for Alice.
Oh, fantastic. You mean Alice Cooper?
Yeah.
Okay, so, if you want to talk in code, you can just say Vincent, and I'll know what you mean.
No. That's good. It's all good.
Okay.
I think it's a new idea.
Well, we had Alice.
Hold on. Let me hang up with them, and I'll be right back. Hold on.
Okay, fantastic. You can bring him on if you want. Okay. That's Ernie Cefalu, folks. This guy's wheeling and dealing
Hello?
while he's actually having an
Okay,
interview.
hold on.
Hey, still here. All right. Ernie is, this probably has to do with the fact that we weren't expecting to have him on today, and he was gracious enough to sweep aside a few personal points of business, and we're just letting him wrap this one up now. I should take this opportunity to talk about Cannabis, but we'll get to that later. Are you there?
Okay, I'm back.
Well, we had Alice Cooper
Hello?
singing. We had Alice Cooper singing "School's Out" at the beginning of the show. I always tie in some kind of classic rock thing, but I'm so excited that you're able to step up into the Paul Flynn gap. He's our British politician who encourages the use of cannabis while he's in the official capacity of being a minister of the government. So that's really exciting for us. Had him on the show before, and thanks for coming on, Ernie.
No, thank you for letting me come on. I really appreciate it.
Letting you. That's hilarious.
Well, no, I mean, it's true. I consider it an honor to be able to, be on your show and we'll talk about, my history.
Well, listen, we don't have to get into the fact that a lot of the people that come on the show here are former sick people, or were sick, or are sick and mitigating it very well with cannabis. Before we get into the deep, great, fantastic history of you and your artistic abilities, let's just zoom right in on the cancer stuff. Now, what happened to you? When did that?
Yeah. Well, to make a long story short.
Well, don't do that.
I was involved with a company that I was working for, who and I had been using recreational marijuana since I was 20 in college in art school, but about 15, maybe 20 years ago, about 15 years ago, actually it was longer than that, 20 years ago, I was working with a company who were friends of mine that I realized that they were, stealing money from me. And I went after them. And it was quite a bit of money. It was like almost $200,000 in commissions that they had moved around and had 3 sets of books. And so I decided to go after them for what I thought was $13,000 that turned out to be $185,000 because they had 3 sets of books. I ended up getting all 3 sets of books, but over the course of the 2-year period that it took from realizing that I needed to go after these guys to actually getting them down to where we had a court date that was set and a week away. In that interim, I lived it really hard. I had never been involved in anything like that, and I was not sleeping. I lost my sense of humor. I was just, just a mental case. And by the end of it all, a few months before our court date, I ended up being diagnosed with bladder cancer.
Ouch.
And I went to the head of urology at Cedars-Sinai, because I live in LA near Cedars-Sinai, and they diagnosed me with bladder cancer. It was what they call low-grade non-invasive, but it was still cancer. It was early. What had happened was it was a cluster of cancerous tumors about the size of your little fingertip, and one of them burst. And while I was urinating, the stream turned red. And that's enough to freak anybody out. And so immediately I captured the next time I went to the bathroom in a bottle and went to my doctor, who recommended me to this urologist at Cedars-Sinai, who went in and looked at, what was going on and diagnosed it with what they call low-grade non-invasive early stage cancer. And I was lucky that one of the tumors had broke, and that's what bled, and the cluster had not attached itself to anything. It was kind of like floating around.
That's
and once it attaches itself, that's when it starts growing.
Yeah.
So and it was totally caused by stress. Stress was the number one thing, the worrying, the stress, the lawsuit. And
did you get that confirmed by a doctor at all, that it was stress related?
Oh yeah, they had a urology at Cedars-Sinai.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're a little finicky about going along with that. They say,
yeah, well, this guy was really cool. And he understood. And I had been, like I said, using marijuana recreationally since college. And so I never really thought about it as a solution, a medical solution. It was always just recreational. And when I would, work on my work and stuff, it really helped with the creative process. And because a lot of the stuff that I do is conceptual, and then I execute, or I have someone execute, and that's kind of how it works. But after that diagnosis and after my operation, so they were able to go in as an outpatient and remove the tumor. And what they did was they said, don't worry, go home and don't worry. And that's all you do, and then I was worrying about whether I was worrying or not.
Right.
And it just got to be crazy.
It becomes a cycle, right? You get into a fear cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And you're in this spiraling cycle, and it was worry that got me there the first time, and now I'm worrying whether it's going to come back, worrying about all these things. And I was lucky. Right at the time that it happened, there was a new process that they were experimenting with, and it was called BRP. And I don't know what that stands for, but it was a tuberculosis virus that they put into my bladder. I had 11 treatments over the course of a year. And for 2 hours, they drain your bladder and they put this liquid, it would look like water, into your bladder. And then you had to not urinate again for 2 hours. And each 15 minutes you had to roll on your stomach, on your back, on your side, on your head, on your, standing up. So it was like coating. Basically, the way he explained it was like putting enamel on teeth. It coated the inside of my bladder, and if I get a tuberculosis test, I'll come up positive because the thing is in me. But it prevents the attachment, I guess, of cancerous tumors to your bladder. It was really weird. And so to help the stress thing, I had told him that I was a marijuana recreational user, and he said, well, does that work for you? And I said, doesn't seem to be right now, but, so he knew what I was doing. And then I had a friend who said to me, hey, there's this strain of marijuana. It's purple. It's called Granddaddy Perp, and it's really, really good for pain and stress and stuff, and you should really try and get it. So reluctantly, I went down and registered for my card with a medical doctor and then to my state card because, I'm from the generation where you didn't tell anybody. You didn't tell anybody. It was on the down low. I mean, I'm talking the early 60s. Wow. And so I went and I started going to collectives trying to find the Granddaddy Perp strain, and everybody had it, but it wasn't any different than I was getting from my local. It didn't do anything to me more than, you know, what my local guy was getting me. So I stopped after about a year. I had spent about $3,000 at different collectives trying to find it. And, you know, after a year of that, and it wasn't really doing anything, I stopped looking. And within a month or so of that decision to stop, I get a call from a guy in Northern California who had found me on the internet and knew my work and asked me if I would be interested in creating a logo for them. They have a product and they needed a logo. And I said, well, I'm not really into creating a logo for you because, you know, I've had, in my experience, it's like having a kid and having somebody else raise it. You know, I'm going to do a logo for you, and then you're going to take it to somebody else that's going to screw it all up and not see it the way I see it. I'd rather not do it.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in building a brand, then I'm the guy you want to talk to. So they made an appointment to come and see me. They were in Northern California, and I'm in LA, and they show up, and one guy's in a wheelchair. It was a kid named Ken Estes, and his partner, Ben Tang, who were involved with what came to be the Granddaddy Perp strain. These guys are the ones that brought it to Oakland back in the early 60s. And what their problem, and you know, we started talking. They wouldn't tell me what the product was before they came there. I guess they were afraid that I would say, no, I'm not interested, you know, because it's illegal and all that stuff. And so when they got there, we started talking, and you know, the conversation quickly moved to marijuana, and you know, I started telling my story and how I hadn't been able to see any difference. And I said, let me show you what I have. And I opened up my cabinet and brought out my jar of, you know, Granddaddy Perp, and they looked at it and started laughing. And Ken nodded to the other guy, and they pulled out this mason jar. And as soon as they took the top off, it was like, oh my God, it just, the room filled, the air just filled, and it was purple. And the difference between what I had been getting and what they had was when you broke open what I got, it was green inside. And what theirs was purple all the way through. And then I came to find out that anybody can turn a marijuana plant to a purple bud by exposing it at a certain point in its, you know, evolution, exposing it to more heat or cold, one of the two, I'm not sure which, and it turns it purple, and then they cut it right then. So the outside is purple, but the inside is green. So when I started, you know, needless to say, we hit it off immediately, and oh man, what a difference their product was. And their issue was that they had the original strain, but everybody and their brother had it as well, or at least said they had it. And that's one of the things that is still still apparent today. Any new strain, and I don't know about there in Canada, but any new strain here in the States that's hot, like Girl Scout cookie or Medusa, or, you know, everybody has it. Whether it's it or not, they just name it that. Right. You know, there's no control over trademarking, you know, names and stuff like that. And we are moving forward with King Klones. We do have strains that we've trademarked, but they're not under the marijuana thing. It's all done differently. And then when it becomes more legal, then we bring those into the legality part of it. But we own them. So, you know, their major problem was they needed a logo. They needed to build a brand. They needed to become the original and not just another one. So we did some great marketing, some advertising, some packaging, logo design, put signs in the collectives that our product was in, saying and then promoting the fact that, hey, patient, if you go into your collective and you don't see this signage, turn around and walk out, because you're not going to get the real deal. Right. And people were doing that. It was amazing. So within a couple of years, we built it into an amazing brand that far surpassed everybody else that was an imitator. And at that point, you know, I was now using it medicinally in butter. I would make my own. I would get the shake. I would make my own butter with a double boiler, and then I would make edibles. I would make muffins. And, you know, if I ate a muffin in the morning, I had no pain. Stress was part of it. Later, it became a pain issue with my hips because I've had a couple of bad car accidents in my 20s and in my 40s, and it all went right to my hips. And so I had a real problem with that, you know, with pain as I got older. And so now, you know, I mean, it was at a certain point, it was that I couldn't even walk maybe 10 or 15 feet without having to stop and squat down or bend over or something to relieve my hips, and then move another 20 steps. And like I said, doing the Granddaddy Perp products that I was using before I found these guys, it wasn't doing anything. As soon as I started making my extracted butter and my muffins, it was amazing. It was like a miracle.
And once again,
I would eat a muffin in the morning.
You'd feel great.
It wouldn't hurt. I had no pain all day.
So this is far back as how long ago?
This was probably 12 years ago.
12 years ago. Wow.
12 years ago when I got involved with them.
Now, before that, though, that, a long time ago in the 60s, let's go back to the 60s because this is amazing. The folks may not know that you were an ad guy on Madison Avenue. That was back in the 60s, right? Now, this is obviously before you dreamed up the Stones logo and a lot of other cool artists and their albums, which I do want to spend some time talking about. But
okay, sure.
How does an advertising guy on Madison Avenue, like, you must have been doing regular products like Fleischmann's margarine, or what kind of things were you?
Sure, yeah, wearing blenders and mixers, and New York life insurance, and Omega watches, and all the ITT Live at Palm Coast, which is a big development down in Florida. I was doing a lot of that, working on Madison Avenue. But I had always, before that, when I was in art school, I went to art school in Oakland. And we were just a mile from the Berkeley campus. We were across the bridge from San Francisco. It was a small art college that had about 125 students full-time, accredited college, highly ranked, but very small, very private. And most of the kids that I went to college with lived in the Haight-Ashbury. Now, this is 1963, 64, all the way up to 69 when I went to New York. But during that time, I was right there in the middle of all the stuff in Berkeley and what was going on in Haight-Ashbury. And the funny thing is that music played a big part. Music was a big part of my junior high school, my high school, but it got even bigger when I was in college, because now the music is coming from Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now we're talking early 60s. And all the music was coming from there. And I was right in the middle of all that. And I remember going to the Haight-Ashbury, and, the whole area was full of blacklight stores and Zap comics and incense smells and hippies selling drugs on the street. It was crazy. And one of the most ironic things was that I was a huge Jefferson Airplane fan at the time. And they had a house there in Haight-Ashbury that was their, Grunt Records was their label, and we used to hang out in front of that house when I was in college. And then I go to New York, and 3 years later, I'm working with the Jefferson Airplane in that house.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, really kind of surrealistic, but meaningful, because the movement it wasn't really about medical at that point. It was all about recreational. And it was, along with all the other psychedelics and stuff that was going on at that time, marijuana was a different animal. It was still in the alleys and dark. I mean, the first time I ever scored anything was in San Francisco at a pool hall from this black gentleman that sold us a lid, that came in
and what's that, an ounce, right? That's what an ounce is?
An ounce. An ounce was a lid, and it was $10.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. I hallucinated for hours. I mean, because I'm a very visual person, it really affected me in a whole different way than most. Most people got hungry and tired and went to sleep. Me, I was hallucinating and drawing and sketching and painting and doing all these art things where I would, it would just come out. It was amazing. It was a real mind opener, if you will. I mean, I guess it's a kind of a cliche thing that people say all the time.
Yeah, well, we'll spend some time on that. But when you did your first, so you're doing this stuff on Madison Avenue. But when you were going to the albums, is it true your first album was Jesus Christ Superstar? Did that come out in 1970?
No, the first album I did, that was the first real album. The first album I did was for International Paper Company. International Paper Company was one of my clients on Madison Avenue in the agency that I worked at. And that year, this is 1969, they were introducing 10 of their new paper stocks. So I got the assignment in the agency to do the national sales meeting. So I came up with an idea of doing an off-Broadway kind of Rockettes kind of thing with skits and dancers and songs. And it was at the Roosevelt Hotel. It was a 3-day meeting. And they flew in over 500 salespeople from all over the country, international paper company.
Yeah.
And we hired writers, and they wrote 10 songs. You know, Ticonderoga Text was a huge hit. You know,
what's that? Ticonderoga Text.
Ticonderoga Text. Yeah, that was one of the paper stocks. Okay. So we had writers write songs about them, and we had dancers and singers and skits. And
oh boy!
It was like a musical. It was like a musical Broadway show.
All about paper.
And all about paper. All about new paper stocks.
Oh, amazing!
And one of the things that we did was we pressed an album. We pressed 500 or 600 albums, and I designed an octagon album cover. And on the label, it was very Peter Max. I was very influenced by Peter Max because I'm a very symmetrical kind of graphic designer. I'm very symmetrical. I love balance, you know, and I also do things that aren't balanced, you know, just for impact, but I'm very comfortable with balance and symmetry and stuff. And so I did this album cover, and on the label of the record was a pair of lips, you know, where the spindle hole was, and this is an LP, and I put a big pair of lips. And so that was, and it was given out to 500 salespeople as a sort of a parting gift from the show. And the musical was a big hit and all that stuff. And that was like the first half a day of their 3-day meeting. And then the rest was, you know, sales and all the rest of that. We didn't really get involved with that. But all the stuff that I did, the poster, the teasers, the album, and all that stuff, won all kinds of awards and was hanging in the Union Carbide building in New York. Okay, and I'm working at this agency, and in that same building where all this stuff was hanging, there was a headhunter that worked there that looked me up and said, "Hey, I've got a place where I'd like to send you that they just do album covers." And I said, "Well, I'm really kind of comfortable where I am, and you know, now I'm a big hero, right? Because I did this thing, and it was a big hit.
Paper people love me.
The paper people love me, man. It was awesome, and so I was the golden boy. Why would anybody in their right mind leave that, right?
Oh my
and
God.
So, but he talked me into it, and he would call my wife during the day and say, "This is a great opportunity. You really got to convince him." Because I was into this thing where if you move around too much, you know, people start looking at you going, "Well, yeah, you know, you're not. We can't really bank on you being Mr. Right. You're just Mr. Right now." You know, and I didn't want to be pigeonholed like that, and so eventually I went, and it was a guy who, well, actually, where I went was a guy who was a ex-Marine sergeant major, retired, that opened up an ad agency, okay, and in the 32nd floor of the New York Life building, facing uptown. And now this is Madison. This is the heart of ad guy. This is what I really wanted to do. So I go to this interview, and I'm waiting for the guy to get there, and I'm watching. There's these two guys, and the studio was a long studio that was the whole side of the New York Life building facing uptown, all the glass windows and stuff. And there were probably 25 design tables, and there were two guys with a string from one end of the office to the other of the art department, lining up all the water bowls, all the brushes, everything was like in the military, waxing the floors. And then, and I'm waiting for the owner to get there, right? I'm there early in the morning. And then some of the artists get there, and they're taking their seats and stuff. There's no music going. They're just working. And this guy comes in who's the production. He's the head of production, who in the course of the hour or two that I was there, you know, probably smoked 3 packs of cigarettes, drank a half a pot of coffee, and had 2 heart attacks getting everything through this agency, pushing all the work through. And I was like, man, there's no way I want to work here. This is not going to, I don't care what I'm thinking this in my mind. So the owner comes, he was at a meeting, he shows up, and I'm meeting with him, I'm showing my stuff. And he looks at the International Paper Company thing, and he said, you know, I like your work. You know, he sat back in his chair, and he had a shaved head, and he put his glasses up on his forehead.
Yeah.
And he said, I really like your work. Well, you know, what are you looking for? You know, and I said, well, you know, and I'm thinking in my mind, there's no way I want this job. So I asked for $30,000 more than I would normally ask for.
Yeah, and they gave it to you, right?
And just, well, no. He sat back and he said, well, you know, that's a bit more. We have a need, but it's a bit more than we're looking to spend right now. But thank you for coming in and showing me the book. And I acted remorseful and like very, you know, disappointed. And I left and I was so elated. It was so great. I got out from underneath this thing that instead of taking the subway back to Brooklyn, I took a cab. I was so happy. And then as I got close to where I was living in Brooklyn Heights, I thought, oh man, now I have to explain to my wife why I didn't take this job, why I didn't get the job. You know, and the headhunter's been talking to her and saying, this is it, this is going to be great. And so I get there and she answers the door and she said, you know, the first thing she said to me was, Mr. Levitt just called. He needs you to call him back. And that was the owner. It was Levitt Advertising in Manhattan. So he left a number, and now it's like 7 o'clock at night or some shit. So I call him back. And he said, you know, I've been thinking about it. I talked to my partner, and we're going to go ahead and hire you. We have a real need. And I was like, oh, man, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. You know, it's great. I'm happy because I'm getting $30,000 more than I ever thought I would get. Yeah. But I'm really bummed because I didn't want to work there. It was like a sweatshop. And everybody's, you know, real straight, man. And I've got a beard and long hair. I look like Charlie Manson. You know, and because I had come from art school, everybody looked
also
like that.
A musician, by the way, Charlie Manson. Hey, listen, before we get too much, listen, this has already been made clear to me that speaking with you and the way the time is going on by, we're going to have you back on for some more tales because this is amazing. Before we get to, before we spend some time with the Rolling Stones, I understand people listening to the show, maybe they can't find their International Paper Company album as easily as they can find a Rolling Stones album. But we do have a track here I'd like to spin. These are the folks. I think this is from 1969. Goodness, I don't know if you'll recognize this or not, or if this is a mistake, but it says here this is a song called The Paper Song.
That's one.
The International Paper Company. This is from Dolls Alive. I can only assume that's the band name.
That's the name of the show. I called it Dolls Alive. I did posters and teasers and
well, let's have a little listen here. I just found this. Let's bring it up for the folks.
Send me the link.
I will. Sure, I will. Hang on a second. Here we go.
Okay.
And that's as normal as can be. Oh, I'm just wild about paper. I'm like a child about paper. The feel of it, the touch of it. I just can't get too much of it. And I'm a fool about paper. I lose my cool about paper. So keep your parchment and papyrus for just one thing.
Okay, so that's your parchment and papyrus. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, and they're 10 great songs. I mean, every one of them should have been a number one hit on Billboard.
Sure. Well, let's get into the zone of folks that did have number one hits, and let's move it into the 70s now. With the paper song out of the way. I'll send you the link. It's actually on Amazon. If you type it in, I'll send it to you directly after the show.
Okay,
so you'll have it.
Yeah, and the end of that story basically is that begot me. The same headhunter sent me to another agency where I did Jesus Christ Superstar.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then from that, he sent me to where I did the Rolling Stones time.
So let's spend a bit of time on Jesus Christ Superstar before we get into the meat and potatoes of the Stones. Sure. This is a very classy logo on the front of that album, and I'm going to sound like a complete idiot, but you know, why not? It's my show. I'll do it. And I don't want to say where do you get your ideas, but I know you were involved in Cannabis, but you have a knack for summing up whatever it is the artist, in the initial case there, the International Paper Company, but with these rock stars and musicians, you find a way to obviously make them very happy with what's going on in the album. So, like, what was that thing on the cover of that circular thing that's on the cover of the Jesus Christ Superstar album?
The Praying Angels, yeah. I had been influenced. My grandmother used to collect all these musical things and cards and religious stuff, and I remember angels. You know, angels were a big part of all that. And when one of the ideas that I gave back to it got down to the agency that hired me to do that was in a predicament because they had 2 art directors there that left the agency and took Decca Records with them. Decca Records was one of the agency's accounts, and they left the agency and they were taking that account with them. It happens all the time in advertising. And what happened was the owner of the agency had a very good friend at Decca Records that was above the creative director there, the internal creative director. And he convinced his friend that they had done a great job on this account and they shouldn't lose it just like that. There should be a shootout. Okay, his agency against these 2 guys that were leaving. Okay, and the reason why they paid me more money than I thought was they were in a predicament, and I had done an album cover for International Paper Company. Okay, and so they needed somebody to compete for the account. They were going to lose the account. So the other 2 guys had been briefed a few days earlier, maybe almost a week earlier, and they hired me. I went into his office on a Saturday. It was a Friday that they hired, Friday night. Saturday I went in. He told me what the situation was. On Monday, we had an appointment to meet the creative director at Decca Records, a guy named Bill Levy, who was very pro the other 2 art directors and had already given them the assignment and stuff. And it turned out, to get the briefing, it was the Jesus Christ Superstar album. There were these 2 new guys, Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, that had this very controversial thing, and they needed an album cover. And he gave me the brief, and then asked me when I would like to present. This is a Monday. I said, when are the other guys presenting? And he said, they're going to be presenting the middle of the following week. And I said, I would like to present on Friday. This is Monday. I'd like to present my ideas on Friday. And he looked at me and said, really? Friday? You don't want to take more time? They've already got a head start. I said, Friday will be fine. And my boss was twitching, and I was playing with his money, right? And making these commitments. And I'll never forget, on the ride back to the agency in the cab, he asked me, he said, why did you do that? Why didn't you wait and take more time to really, nail this thing? And I said, first of all, I already know what I want to do. Second of all, I want to be first, because then they have to come up to what we've done. I don't have to try and top what they've done, and he already likes them. Right. So I want to be first in, and that Friday we made the presentation. I was very pro another idea that I had that was like a world with all this anger going on around it and an atom bomb exploding, and it was very cool graphic. And the other idea was these angels, and they went for the angels just like that. Right. It was amazing. So the agency kept the business, and I managed that account for almost a year before I went off and did the Rolling Stones stuff.
Okay, so now we're at the Rolling Stones. Everybody has seen this thing. This is one of these.
Right.
The thing I want to talk to you about here is that I can promise you that there are rabid, of course, Rolling Stones fans throughout the ages. But then there are also people that, they like some of the songs, and then there are people that don't care for them at all. But all of those people have in common that they understand that logo. They get it. It's ubiquitous.
Right.
Has it taken on slight changes over the times? Companies will tinker with their logo, like Starbucks or what have you. It seems to me that yours has just sat still. It's been the same way ever since, and you really have a way of nailing something to the point where no one wants to change it.
Right. Well, it was changed. What happened was...
Did you change it, though?
No.
Oh.
No, I had created it, and then it was changed within a couple of months by a guy named John Pichet.
Oh, okay.
Who was an English designer, and it's a long story, but that I really shouldn't go into, but of why it all happened. It was very political. But Marshall Chess grew up with the guy that I went to work for to do that. What happened was I went on this interview, and I was there to show him. This guy just did album covers. He did the Banana cover for Velvet Underground. He did the Led Zeppelin 3 album with the wheel, and he was mainly into board constructions.
Right.
And I was there because he needed a creative director. He had gotten an assignment from Marshall Chess to create a logo for the Rolling Stones. This is the beginning of 1971. And so I went there on an interview. The headhunter talked me into going again, and I showed him the Jesus Christ Superstar stuff, right? Because that was really hot right then. I mean, it was like the church had condemned it. Everybody, you're going to hell if you listen to it.
Right.
It was really, really on the top of a lot of people's minds. And So I'm showing him the Jesus Christ Super stuff and all the merch that I did with it, you know, because it was more than just an album cover, a box with stuff. It was a lot of stuff that was done, calendars and stickers and all that stuff. And I'm showing him all that stuff, and he's looking at it, and he goes, well, yeah, this is all really cool. What else have you got? And I showed him the International Paper Company album, the Octagon album, right?
Yeah.
So he's looking at it, and it's a board package, okay? And I didn't even know that the industry was pushing toward board away from paper wrap packages. And
you're talking about that. That's the
up.
actual album cover, right? It was a lot more flimsy back in the day. Is that what you mean by that? Cardboard? Right.
Well, it was a chipboard that had two labels adhered to it. The front cover was a piece of paper that was mounted to it, and then it wrapped around, and then they stuck another piece on the back.
Oh, right.
And that was a paper mounted to board, and you couldn't do die cuts and you couldn't do embossing and stuff because the tangencies were not there. You were doing it on a piece of paper that was then mounted to a board, and the variances were minute, but would still not work with die cutting and embossing and doing interactive things.
Okay.
And so, you know, it was a board package which he loved, and when he opened it up, he took the record out, and on the label was this pair of lips. And he's looking at it, and I'm talking, and he started to tell me the story about how he had grown up with Marshall Chess, and Marshall's dad sold Chess records to Atlantic, and Atlantic put Marshall's dad as president, and his dad made him manager of the Rolling Stones, and he wanted to do a logo for them. So he came to his friend, who I went to work for, and so he's telling me the story, and he said, you know, this pair of lips that you have on this label, he said, if you go upstairs, he had a little 3-story brownstone in Manhattan on 53rd and between Madison and Park, right across from Lever Brothers, all these skyscrapers in this little 3-story brownstone carriage house. He said, if you go upstairs to my art department and put a tongue on the outside of these lips, I think I could sell this to the Rolling Stones.
Wow.
And so I went upstairs to his art department. Took me about 15 minutes. I drew it, drew some teeth on there, went downstairs, showed it to him. He said, okay, perfect, wait here. Got in a cab, went over to Andy Warhol's factory, and that's where Marshall was. Showed it to Marshall, and Marshall loved it. He came back, and I'm still there with a couple of his salespeople, and we're talking and smoking a fatty, because after 5 o'clock, they broke out the smoke, and it was great. And I'm thinking, just like the other place that I didn't want to work there, I want to work here.
Oh, sure.
And it was all young. It was all young people, man. There was probably 6 or 7 young people. His creative director had become very ill with a paralyzing disease, and he had this assignment.
Right.
So he comes back. We're blazing like crazy. He puts the thing down on the desk, and he said, "Okay, you just designed the Rolling Stones logo, and you get $200 in a job." And that's what I got.
Wow. So do you have any?
And in turn,
do you have any financial legacy from that logo?
The only thing is that I own the rights to that particular logo.
Right.
It was then changed within a month or so by John Pache.
Oh.
It was used. His version was used on the record, and on the back of the record, real small, and then on the sleeve with the lyrics printed over it. And my logo was used for all the merchandise, all the T-shirts and stickers and belt buckles and roach clips and
wow.
posters and little Licks Cloisonne pens that we did, and so that they used both of them at the same time. He took what I did and changed it a bit. He put highlights in the lips, and he took the lines out of the teeth, and I think his logo only had 1 highlight in the tongue. Mine had 2. And John Pache's, quite honestly, I think is much better than mine because it's very animated. If you look at the two side by side, his is more like a gesture drawing rather than a life drawing. It has action to it, and the Stones are all about movement.
Sure.
And mine is very stiff. Mine is very much like the Jesus Christ Superstar logo because it's a graphic, and I didn't really. It's very stiff, and like I say, John Pache's is very animated, and I think it's a better representation of.
Yeah, but then he might not have come up with that without your genesis of
exactly.
Starting.
Well, and that's again, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Who cares? They used both of them at the same exact time.
Yeah. So moving on to through time, because we're I can tell we're gonna. I still need to get to the cannabis stuff. I guess we'll save that to the end of the show.
Well, the cannabis has been playing a part all along.
It
here.
has. No, absolutely. I want to get into that, but I want to talk about an album cover that moved me more than the Rolling Stones album at the time. No offense to the Stones. Now this goes into your manufacturer.
I hope it's one I did.
Oh, sure. The manufacture of these things, it became fascinating to us young folks. Now everything's a download. Now there's nothing even in existence unless they do a poster, flash sticks and everything.
Right.
But at the time, I remember going downtown to this record store that was quite famous in Toronto, and it was a bit of a zoo in there called Sam the Record Man's. And I remember coming home with this coolest album ever that I could even imagine was the cover. And I couldn't wait to get home. That was always the buzz, bringing this thing home on the public transit after school. So here's Alice Cooper with Schools Out. Now here's a desk. It looks like a school desk, and you could actually open it up, and there was all this cool stuff inside. I mean, how did you just run with that? I mean, you got to, you made a fake desk you couldn't have done that with the old ways of record albums, covers.
Right, you couldn't. It had to be a board package because on that not only did the lid of the desk open up, but underneath the back cover, the legs fell down and it stood up.
Yeah, you could lean it up and set it up on
stand
your.
It up.
Yeah,
you could set it up on whatever you were. And then what happened was I was sent. So I went to work for the company that did that I did the Rolling Stones song for. They sent me out to Los Angeles because the music business was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay, the sound was now coming not so much from New York and Chicago, it was coming from San Francisco and Los Angeles. So all these companies, and there weren't that many, there were maybe 3 companies that did album cover design, and then every record company had its own art department. But the record industry was moving out here. So not only was the packaging changing from paper wrap to board, and the music was now changing because the Beatles came along with multi-track recording, and musicians were pushing the limits with their equipment and their instruments. They were also starting to work directly with artists like myself and not leaving it up to a manager or a record company. They had the ability to control all that. So all this change was going on, and I was sent out to Los Angeles because there was a lot of animosity between Los Angeles and New York. Los Angeles people were like the county mouse, and the New York people were like the city mouse. And there was this real argument thing about, hey, city slicker, don't come out here and try and tell me how to do business.
Right.
And you could definitely see the difference in taste. And, the people from New York were more active and more aggressive. The people in Los Angeles were more laid back. I was from California, so I was the perfect guy to come out here and help open up a satellite office for this company. And in doing that, I at the same time, Cheech and Chong had come out with their first album,
right?
And I was a huge fan of that. And I found out through Billboard magazine because, like you said, there was no, internet, no iTunes, none of that. It was whatever came in Billboard magazine or the disc jockeys were talking about. Or if you went into a record store and went through the ocean of records, that was how it was conveyed. I found out in Billboard magazine and Bubbling Under that Cheech and Chong were getting in the studio doing a new album. And at the same time, I was enamored by Alice Cooper, who people didn't know whether he was a man or a woman, didn't know whether he was a demon or an angel. They didn't know whether he would kiss you or bite you. He was hanging himself. He was ripping chickens apart on stage. It was just crazy, and he was bringing theater, which I loved. And I had never seen him live, but I had heard his music Under My Wheels and stuff from the Killer album.
Right.
And so I worked knowing that both those groups were based in Los Angeles. I created 2 comps that I would bring out here, and we would try and reach out to the management or to the group to have them see what I had an idea for them. And one was the Cheech and Chong Big Bamboo album.
Right.
And the other one was the Alice Cooper Schools Out. And I had created comps, handmade comps of both packages. And when we were out here, the guy that I came out with was the vice president. He was the sales guy of the company that I was the creative director for. And we reached out he called Shep Gordon and said, hey, we're out here. We're from New York. I've got the creative director that did the Rolling Stones song and Jesus Christ Superstar and all these other albums. And we have an idea for you that we would like to share with you at no expense on your part. If you give us 10 minutes of your time, that's all we want. And Shep said, have you ever seen Alice live? And he said, no. He said, well, this is like on a Wednesday or Thursday. Alice is appearing at the Palladium on Saturday. Why don't you guys come, and then we'll have a meeting on Monday, right?
Right.
Well, we showed up at that concert at the Palladium. Canned Heat opened for them. When Alice came out, it was amazing. First of all, they were promoting it like, if you've got a weak heart and stuff, you should definitely not go to this concert.
Oh, is that right? Why is that? Because of the chickens?
Yeah, because you didn't know what Alice was going to do.
Oh, I see.
And if you have a weak heart, you don't want to experience this. And if you do come, we have nurses and doctors on the site that are ready to, administer CPR or whatever it is. That's Shep Gordon. That's the brilliance of Shep Gordon.
Wow.
You tell somebody that they shouldn't do something, the first thing they want to do is do it.
Yeah.
So we go to this concert, and I got to tell you, I was absolutely blown away. When the sound level was like at a 7 for Canned Heat. When Alice came out, it went to a 25.
Oh, wow.
I thought the Palladium was going to come down. It was shaking. We were up in the balcony stage, right, and we had a great seats. Okay, so he comes out, does a few songs, and then he starts doing the West Side Story, the Jets and the, I can't remember. I can never remember. I always remember the Jets.
Okay.
But I can't remember the other.
The Sharks, I think.
Gang.
The Sharks.
Sharks and the Jets, yeah. And during the song, there's a heckler heckling Alice. And he's ignoring him at first, and he gets louder, and pretty soon Alice is interacting with him and calls him up on stage. The guy gets up on stage. Alice pulls out a knife and stabs him. Guy falls over. The lights go out. Black. Pitch black.
Wow.
Okay? Lights come back on. Alice is in the straitjacket. They're walking him up the stairs to a judge that's sitting there, right? Condemns him to death. Boom. The lights go out. Come back on, and he's going up the guillotine. The hangman's noose.
Right.
And they put the noose around his neck, okay? The drum roll happens. The bottom falls out. He's hanging there, jerking and stuff. The lights go out, and that's the end of the concert.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't come back out for an encore. He doesn't. It's it. People were freaking out. People were screaming. Women were passing out. I'm not kidding you. And there was all this buzz about he killed himself. He's dead. He's dead. And the disc jockeys are talking about, because there was no internet, you knew what you saw, and there was no more. He didn't come out for an encore. The group didn't come out, and people were hanging around for 10, 15 minutes after the lights came back on to find out if he was going to come back, until you didn't know whether he was alive or dead. So Monday morning, we're sitting in the live office with Shep, and there's Alice, very cool, drinking a beer. And it was just amazing. And from that moment on, I've been a huge advocate of Alice Cooper, a part of the Alive family. I've done 13 albums for him, and hopefully I've got a new one that I'm going to pitch to Bob Ezrin on Friday that will hopefully get me number 14.
For the next Alice Cooper album?
Yeah.
And that's coming out soon. I'm looking forward to that. He still has a radio show that I listen to quite often when I get the chance.
Yeah. He's a great guy.
You've done a ton of other albums. I'm going to say over 200. What is it, 209? You're looking for 210 now with Alice?
No, 233.
233. Okay, so I'm going to run some names by you.
Okay.
Let's go to Black Sabbath. Which album was that? Which was your first
Bloody
album?
Sabbath.
Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath.
Sabbath, Bloody. Right.
Folks, take the time to Google these things up and take a look at some of these things, because you will definitely have seen them before. And we're talking with Ernie Cefalu, who is the man who designed so many of these. He's incredible, and I'm looking forward to that next Alice Cooper album now. I'm going to say send over the working papers, but we'll wait till it comes out.
Yeah.
But you did Black Sabbath.
I'll send you over the rolling papers.
Oh, dude. By the way, still love that Big Bamboo album. That's a classy-looking cover. What was that all about? That was Cheech and Chong, a big, giant rolling paper package?
Well, basically the same thing happened. I mean, we had secured the Alice Cooper package, and the next thing was, because we were from New York, we didn't really know anybody out here, and we were promised work by the guy we were working for that never materialized. So we're here like saltwater fish in a freshwater tank. It was, and that's when I pulled these two comps out. Even the guy that I came out here with, his vice president, didn't know I had done them. And so he pitched the Alice Cooper thing to Shep. when we showed them before we jump onto the other piece,
sure.
When we showed them the comp, they loved it, and Shep pulled the record out. I had it in a Warner Brothers paper sleeve, and he pulled the record out, and he pulled the sleeve off, and he said, I just ordered, a couple 100,000 of these paper panties that we're going to drop over the Hollywood Bowl when Alice is there in a week or two, whatever, a month or whatever it was. Why don't we put it over the record? So he slipped the record into the paper panties and put it back into the package, the desk that was standing up, and that's how that was Shep's idea, to put the paper panties on there.
Right.
And then, with Cheech and Chong, I had the same thing. So we had such great luck with the Alice, the guy who was the sales guy, who ended up becoming my partner in Pacific Pioneer, a guy named Tony Graboy, called up Lou Adler at Ode Records and said, hey, we've got the art director here, a creative director that's just did all these things, and he's got an idea that I think you're going to absolutely love. So we went over to see Lou Adler and Cheech and Chong. We showed him the package. They loved it so much that the album was already done. It was already recorded.
Sure.
They went back into the studio and recorded a little tidbit at the end of the record where Cheech Marin goes to Tommy Chong's house, and he's got this big joint that they start smoking, and it's filled with his gym socks and all this shit, and they're getting high. And he said, "Where did you get this big paper?" And he said, "Well, it's in the new Cheech and Chong album."
Oh, great!
And that's how that happened. I showed them a comp that I had created, and that, with the big poster that was the paper that pulled out, and that's how that came about. And then what happened was, we started getting a lot of negative feedback and promises that had been made that weren't being kept. And so we decided that we were going to leave that company. The guy that was his vice president was going to leave because he was getting screwed around. His promised stock in the company had never materialized. I was promised autonomy and being able to control everything that I designed out here. It was taken away and taken to New York, into the New York office. And we were told to just keep working. So I decided I was going to leave. I was being wined and dined by the guy that I was working for, his competitor, who was a printer out of Chicago, a company called AGI, and they were wining and dining me to come to work for them. And so I was going to leave and go to work for them and the guy that was the vice president. And now by this time we had really bonded. And we didn't want to leave because we really enjoyed each other and how we worked together. But there was no way we were going to continue working for this guy. So we decided the weekend that we were going to be meeting with the boss on that Monday, we decided that we would drop. I had some great mescaline. So we both took this amazing mescaline that I had brought back from Oakland. When I was in college, I still had a lot of friends there. So I'd go home to San Jose on the weekends and get together with my friends in Oakland that I had gone to college with. And
amazing.
We had great mushrooms and psilocybin and weed. And so I brought some mescaline back with me, and we took some mescaline. And on that night, we bonded even more, and we decided that we would, if whoever we went to work for, we were going to run into the same problems, and what we wanted to do was do it ourselves. So we decided to start Pacific Pioneer.
And then a few years ago, you did Burton Cummings' album, and before that, you did the Guess Who, Burton Cummings band, the Canadian group Guess Who. Which album was that? The Guess Who album?
The Guess Who album that I did was the Artificial Paradise album.
Okay.
Which I thought was in Burton loved, and then Burton and I, we're best friends. I've done 7 albums for him, his solo album, Massey Hall, and this new one with Above the Ground, and just a poetry book that we just completed about a year ago, and now we're working on the second one. He's got amazing poetry books and stuff, and we've been best friends since 1972.
What a great body of songs into the. I know I push the Canadian agenda sometimes, but if you don't know the Guess Who, it's a great group from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They still play now. A version of them anyway. And Burton Cummings has certainly got one guy, fantastic voice that nobody else has, which is always a mark of a great band. Yeah, he's
very unique, and I mean he's a great songwriter. He's a great poet. I mean he's very, very talented guy, and I have a lot of respect for him, and he has a lot of respect for me. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was at the River Rock Casino there in Canada,
Richmond, and just south of Vancouver.
And he called me out on stage, And it's on my Facebook page. It's really pretty cool. About 8,000 people have seen it. It was amazing. I wasn't expecting that, because when I go to his concerts, I'm always in the wings. I don't really want to sit out in the audience. And
yeah.
I enjoy being up on stage because I feel like I'm there, with the band. They're right there. And so he actually called me out on stage and then went through the whole thing of the different albums that I did for him and Rolling Stones Tongue and stuff like that. He's a really good friend and loyal, very loyal.
Oh, that sounds good to hear.
So,
hey, listen, when you're designing an album cover, or say you have an artistic project at hand, and what exactly, we're going to slide into the what you do now at King Klone, but how does cannabis exactly factor into your artistic output? I'm really more of a graphic designer than I am an illustrator, but the strongest thing that I bring is the concept. I'm really, it's the fine art of the concept, because you could be a really great illustrator or a designer or something, but if the concept isn't there, then you're really, you're not really solving the issue. So do you listen to the album or research the biographies of the musicians, or what are all the different things that you do to dream up what you come up with?
Well, I first of all, I listen to the music. Second of all, I get very intimate with the artists that I'm working with, intimate in the sense that I want to know what their vision is, what their messaging is, how they see it. A lot of people, especially art departments and record companies, didn't take time to do that. They'd get 30 releases a month and they'd have to just bang them out. We took the time, and I've always taken the time to understand what they see, not what I see. It's what they see. It's the message they want to convey with their music. And I listen to the music and I ask questions and I tell them the truth. And again, I preface it by saying, look, I'm not a musician. I can't even carry a tune in a bucket, but I have a pretty good ear, and I know what commercially, works, and so they respect that. They respect the fact that I tell the truth and not just something they want to hear. Celebrities of any kind, they have a tendency to get surrounded by people that tell them what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear. And I've always been, a strong advocate for letting them know what they need to hear, at least in my opinion.
Okay.
It's one person's opinion. And, and then I start, the role that cannabis plays in it, well, I stay stoned all the time. And so that helps the thinking. I mean, it sounds weird, and can I do it without it? Yeah, but it's a lot more fun with it.
Well, I'm going to say that I think I'm going to point out.
Life is too short.
I'm going to point out to the listeners and perhaps some other people that eventually get around to this thing when it replays is that if you've been listening to Ernie with us, we've had him on the line for almost an hour now. We're going to move into the current day efforts of King Klone, but you can tell that Ernie is he's been around for a long time. He's been using cannabis throughout. He is telling us that it's good for the brain, and I don't think you can really find any sort of obvious problems with the way Ernie comports himself and delivers this information. Once again, blowing out of the water these notions that it's bad for your brain, perhaps if you're using it improperly, but a Grammy-winning artist of this capacity who's worked with so many people has a the largest privately owned original album art collection, album cover art collection in the world. Check this out at originalalbumcoverart.com. Originalalbumcoverart.com has over 350 signed originals, and it's fun to go through it. And, it brings back he drew this too? Wow, I can't believe it. You were so pervasive in your skills back in those days. I feel remiss not talking for about a half an hour on every single band and artist that you've come to, but we are approaching the end of the show, Ernie, and I do want to spend some time on your current efforts. You are not only an artist, you're the president of King Klone, which is with K's. So tell us about what King Klone is and what you do there. And we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left with you before we have to get going. So this is important because it's modern day time. We've got your artistic cred going back 5 decades. But what do you do with King Klone, and how does that work? And what's your role there as the creative director?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, I basically I was with the Granddaddy Perp guys, like I said, and we decided. I decided that the guy that was our poster boy, if you will, the kid Estes, was just a loose cannon. He was really wasting a lot of time and money and effort, and we had built this great brand that he was unraveling, as personally. And so I decided to leave, and his geneticist, the guy that was creating all these strains, was set up as well. So we decided that we would start a company together, him being the geneticist and me doing all the branding. And we decided, and our main forte was clones. And our clones are amazing. They're like nobody else's clones in the industry. We have the best clones. We're based in Northern California. So we have all the award-winning strains. I think we won something like 15 awards in the last few years with all the strains that my partner Ben has created. And they're sought after highly, and we have all the genetics. And just, like any other industry, if you have the secret recipe, then you pretty much own it. And, the system of growing the clones is real proprietary, the equipment and the way he does it. And, so we started out with that. We started out with cloning and selling the clones, and then we expanded into flowers and concentrates. We're heavy into the concentrates and oils and shatters and stuff like that now. We have vape pens. And it's been, King Klones has been around for about 7 years. And we started out just him and I in a small little place. And now he's partners with a guy in the second largest collective in San Jose. It's called CA Collective, and it's about 50,000 square feet. This, in a very few months, they'll be doing about 1,000 pounds about every 6 weeks of quality strains and stuff that are sold through the collective. And we're starting to expand into other things like drinks and edibles and things like that too. So, and I started out doing all the graphics and the branding and stuff and packaging and things like that. And Ben concentrates on all the genetics, and we have a great relationship and total respect for each other. I mean, the guy was an engineer in Silicon Valley. They got fed up with doing that stuff and loved botany and growing stuff. And so he started, instead of, cloning different kinds of trees together and that kind of stuff, he started cloning marijuana and growing marijuana, and just incredible. I mean, incredible product. Some of the best I think that Northern California has to offer. And, we're basically from one end of California to the other with our products. And we're in, I think, 30, before the laws changed, we were in like 33 other collectives with our products. We also have a line of soils and nutrients and fertilizers that we sell on Amazon.
Okay.
And King Klone Nutrients, and that's on Amazon because we can go across state lines with that stuff.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you designed the logo for King Klone. Is that about right?
Yes.
And all of these other names you've got. If you go to kingklonebrand.com, and that's with K's, folks, King Klone, Klone brand.com, you'll see a bunch, maybe 30 maybe or so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like 20,
logos,
16 or 18 of these things. There's awards. They've gotten awards from the bioengineering lab, master cultivators, genetic engineers. This is a real company, folks. This is a fantastic place to go and learn a lot about what a clone is. I had no idea. I'm so not aware of all of these aspects. I didn't know what a clone was till about 2 months ago.
Yeah, well, it's a very up and coming industry, and a lot of people are jumping in, and I don't think there's going to be as many I think there'll be more people that lose their ass in this industry than there was in the .com burst. I mean, when .com first came out, everybody in there. Well, because everybody has this idea that all you do is poke a hole in the ground, throw in a seed, water it, and up pops $1 million.
Right. And
it doesn't work like that anymore. It's not like that anymore. 3 years ago, if you had a good pound of really good pot, you could get $3,500, $4,000 for it. Today, you're lucky if you get $1,500.
Now, is that because?
And on top of that,
why is that?
Because of the supply. There's so much everywhere now.
Right.
And it's really driven the prices down, and the quality is not there. A lot of these. In fact, the largest collective in San Jose is yet to grow a good crop of anything, and they've been in business for a couple of years.
Wow.
It's very, very hard because you get these connoisseur growers that grow, 10 lights, 20 lights. Now you're in a facility that's got 1,000 lights. How do you do that? Well, my partner Ben can do that. He understands that. He's done it again and again and again. At one time, he had 6 collectives going at one time, with grows and everything. I mean, so this guy knows how to set it all up, how to do it, and how to start. Our tagline with King Klone's, when you start with us, you finish with the best. And that's the truth. And it all starts with the genetics, because you can spend 3 months growing something that's really crap, and nobody wants it. And if it's got pesticides on it, the state makes you destroy it. You can't even make oil out of it. So, and that's the other thing that's really going to hurt this industry is the government doesn't really know what they're doing. So they're putting all these major taxes and restrictions, and it's just all messed up. Because they think that there's millions of dollars to be made, and there is, but not like it was. And with the 47% tax, you're screwed. I mean, why would you? So what's happened is the black market's going through the roof.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going through the roof, we just we've got to get going here. I think we're pretty much we're wrapping it up. But Ernie is a fellow who's got 3 Grammy nominations. He's got 10 Music Hall of Fame awards, 4 awards of excellence from the Los Angeles Art Directors Club, and 25 gold albums and a triple platinum album. Because he doesn't know what he's doing, right? Because he uses cannabis, and cannabis can't possibly be good for you. Well, I'm so happy to have you.
No way that could be possible. No way.
Yeah, no way. So check out King Klone Brand and check out Ernie's artwork. You probably have several boxes of it if you have albums at all, stored away. Ernie's work is in your home. So, Ernie, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, man, and I hope we can do it again real soon.
Oh, I'm sure we will. Stories. Oh, there's a million stories. Well, that's good.
There's a million stories.
We only got to about 5 of them, and I know there's a million stories, so we're super looking forward to having you on again. Ernie Cefalu, folks.
Right, I appreciate it.
Where can we reach you? Where can you be found?
You can reach me at originalalbumcoverart.com or on at my email address is Ernie@Hornbook, HORNBOOKINK.com, or on Facebook.
All right, fantastic. Ernie Cefalu, folks, thanks very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I'm very honored that you would have me on. I appreciate it.
We'll talk to you again.
Take care, man. Thank you.
That's Ernie, folks. That was amazing. I really got into that. There's so many more things I'd like to discuss with Ernie artistically, coming up with these things, some of the methods of reflection and pause that you can employ as a tool when you're using cannabis. Clone, like I said, KingKloneBrand.com. Really fine stuff on there. So, yeah, just before we wrap things up, I got a couple more quick hits to get out so that I don't have to carry them into next week. Okay, so let's design that for you right now. Here we go. Couple of problems, couple of issues in the news. We've got a few minutes. Let's cover it. Okay, so what we have here with here it is. Cannabis industry is alarmed over the amendment requiring shareholders' identities to be made public. This is in the Ottawa Citizen, the rag paper of the capital of Canada. Now, this sounds bad at the beginning, but if it's going to help us understand how much the police chief who designed Canada's weed architecture, post-legalized architecture, Bill Blair, is concerned, I can't wait to find out. The cannabis industry is alarmed by an amendment in Canada's proposed marijuana law that would require companies to make public the identities of shareholders. Wow. A public list of, like East Germany kind of thing. That's where we're at with all this stuff. Now, a public list of investors is needed to prevent organized crime from infiltrating the industry when recreational marijuana is legalized, said senators who adopted the amendment. I wonder if the senators would also like to speak to the fact that the organized criminal at the top of the heap who's even designed any of this medical recreational post-nightmare is Bill Blair. This guy's a police officer. And they didn't ask folks like myself or other similarly afflicted people, what's the deal? How did you use this? Did it help you? Did you find it helpful? Did it forestall your eventual death? They don't ask questions like that. Canadian medical cannabis companies have already received millions of dollars from anonymous rich investors based in offshore tax havens in the Cayman Islands. Wow. Stephen Bronfman comes to mind. The Bahamas and other countries warned Senator Claude Carignan, who proposed the amendment. Tax havens are well known as fronts for organized crime. And the fucking Queen, apparently. Carignan said, if we want to combat organized crime, we must prevent these groups from entering the legal cannabis market anonymously or through havens. Now, that's all some pretty fancy talk for the fact that the people that have taken over the industry are criminals who have taken it over and told people that know what they're doing, such as the Ernie Cephalus and the other growers of decades gone by, that they're criminals. Not okay. Did you also know that Forbes Lifestyle says that smoking marijuana is a dying trend? Now, they don't mean consuming marijuana is a dying trend. They're talking about actually lighting it up. It says the typical cannabis user is often represented with images of stoners and potheads blowing out massive plumes of smoke. Notice we didn't have that on this show. But it seems that smoking marijuana is a dying trend now that more health-conscious cannabis consumers are searching for alternatives to inhaling their buzz. The cannabis industry has set its sights on the multi-billion-dollar market with products destined to make pot consumption more socially acceptable, also known as edibles, oils, liquids. That's exactly the kind of thing that the Canadian government has not moved on. They're just going to keep that on hold, and you're not allowed to do that. So once again, let me just say, boycott the OCS, boycott the government telling you what you can do, have as many plants as you'd like to have, put them in a safe place where you understand you won't be arrested. Let's just see them try to enforce these laws across the board. I'm saying no to this. I'm saying I'm not going to swallow this and then dig out from it 4, 5, 7 decades from now. Oh, you know what? It was really wrong what they did. Let's change it to the right thing. That moment is now. That moment is these days. That moment is not waiting around for another governmental body to say what is okay to be had and what isn't. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm kind of done talking about it on their behalf. They're always bringing bogus shit to the table, filled with lies, can't back it up, and refuse to speak with folks such as myself. So I'm kind of done with it. Kind of done with asking permission. We're just going to steamroll ahead with what we need to do, and that really is how it's going to go. So let's gear up the end of the show, because we got to go. This has been Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park and Green Crush with Alan Park, and we look forward to having you back next week. And this month we'll be having our comedy episode. You'll want to be around for that. Green Crush is brought to you by free-thinking individuals everywhere that don't kowtow to what the government tells you to do, because it's not up to them to help me extend my life. It's up to me to do that, and I won't be told otherwise.